Ousmane Bougouma, président de l'Assemblée législative de transition du Burkina Faso, que je représente ici à cette conférence. Et à travers lui, recevez aussi les salutations et surtout les félicitations de son Excellence, le président du Faso, le capitaine Ibrahim Traoré. Alors le thème que nous animons ce matin, intitulé « Souveraineté économique et ressources naturelles », nous interpelle tous. C'est pourquoi je prendrai juste quelques exemples tirés de notre pays et de l'Afrique en général pour justement montrer que jusque-là, l'Afrique, le Burkina Faso, n'ont jamais été libres dans l'exploitation de leurs ressources naturelles. Et cela a certainement influencé l'économie. Lorsque j'étais à l'école primaire, on nous a toujours dit que le Burkina Faso est un pays pauvre, qu'il n'y a pas de ressources minières, qu'il n'y a aucune ressource capable de soutenir notre économie. C'est vrai que nous n'en savions rien, mais nous l'avons accepté, nous nous sommes résignés à pouvoir donc comprendre que ce que le colon nous dit, que c'est cela qui est vrai. Parce que nous n'avons aucune expertise pour contredire donc ce qu'ils étaient en train de nous dire. Et cela n'a pas été seulement le cas du Burkina. Je sais que beaucoup d'autres pays d'Afrique ont été soumis à ce mensonge. Ce mensonge éhonté juste pour nous exploiter. Alors, aujourd'hui, que nous avons décidé de prendre notre destin en main, nous avons vu que nous sommes très, très riches. Où étaient ces minéraux que nous exploitons aujourd'hui? Où étaient ces minéraux d'or, des minéraux de manganèse, des minéraux de toutes sortes, et même bientôt de pétrole? Où cela était? C'était là, et c'était connu du colonisateur. Mais juste pour nous endormir et pouvoir exploiter ça de manière éhontée et nous garder dans la pauvreté. Alors c'est pourquoi cette conférence est la bienvenue pour qu'enfin l'Afrique puisse sortir de ces mensonges, pour quitter donc de cette manière de concevoir les choses et nous garder dans la pauvreté. Nous devrons donc nous-mêmes prendre en main ce que Dieu nous a donné. L'Afrique est le continent le plus riche. L'Afrique est le continent le plus riche. Juste sa superficie seule parle. Quel est le continent qui a 30 millions de kilomètres carrés? Il n'y en a pas. Donc ça, rien que l'espace constitue une richesse naturelle que Dieu nous a donnée. Et à l'intérieur, il y a donc les minéraux. Bon, donc, je ne vais pas répéter ce que le docteur Thomas Taïbois, qui nous a parlé donc donc des ressources naturelles et tout l'impact et les défis qui nous sont donc à prendre en compte. Donc, nous aurons après lui après lui, je m'en vais donc inviter Dr Zach Kawalala du Malawi pour son intervention. Il est là, j'espère. OK. Docteur, vous avez la parole pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
The chair of the conference, Honorable Sarah Opendi, Right Honorable Speakers, Deputy Speakers, Honorable Members of Parliament, esteemed fellow clergy, members of the civil society, ladies and gentlemen. I came to this conference not having an idea that I will be making an intervention. Sitting here from the first day to yesterday, provoked me that I should proceed and make an intervention. I've been compelled by occasion and grace, and my intervention would therefore focus on our hearts, the heart of the African. Growing up, I learned in school about the scramble for Africa, the scramble for the natural resources, the scramble for natural capital. The capital, the natural capital that Africa possesses. I stand before you, honorable members, to announce that the scramble for Africa has never stopped and has not stopped. This scramble for Africa was so intense around the late 19th century when European powers sought to colonize and control large parts of the African continent. From roughly 1881 to 1914 rather, countries like Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Italy raced to claim territories driven by desire for our natural resources, a desire for our land, a desire to compete over our land and to see who can have much of our land. None of these countries ever sought the good of Africa, and they have never sought the good of Africa to this day. That has not changed. This frenzy was largely formalized during the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, where European leaders laid down rules for dividing Africa among themselves without considering the existing cultures and political boundaries. That dividing of Africa into boundaries has continued to divide Africa into conflicts within the continent. Honorable members, that dividing has not changed to this day. Despite the grim repercussions of the scramble, this period of dividing Africa shaped the current political landscape that Africa is today. Isn't it fascinating, albeit sobering, to reflect on how history has shaped nations and our cultures? That said, I strongly believe that Africa is in her Kairos moment for total economic liberation. If that liberation does not come through democratic processes, it shall still come otherwise. I therefore see the African Charter on family sovereignty and values before us as an instrument that is at the threshold of the total economic freedom for the continent of Africa. That is why, where we are we need to recognize that we have reached this far because we have allowed our natural capital to remain at that level of natural capital. It is only industrialization that will change Africa and transform it into independence. The African Union recognizes that industrialization is a prerequisite to development and prosperity. And I add to say that aid is not and shall never be. Funding from US aid or UN agencies is not a prerequisite to development and prosperity. Today we all know that 34 countries of the 50 LDC countries are in Africa, with an ever-increasing level of poverty due to the low levels of industrialization. Industrialization, brothers and sisters, honorable members, is what will give Africa the cutting edge. It needs to compete on the world market. In its current form, our institutions like World Trade Organizations, they will continue to perpetuate Africa to remain at natural capital level other than moving forward to a productive capital level. Let me be quick to say that African governments need to rethink of its membership to imperialistic institutions that only exist to exploit Africa. Honorable members, it is a fallacy to dream of economic growth. It is a fallacy to think of sovereignty in a state of poverty. The recent former president of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, a 3 times Ghanaian presidential candidate who eventually got elected in 2016, once said, and I quote, "About 30 years ago, some African nations, beginning with Ghana and Uganda, implemented liberal economic reforms to stop their economic decline. But in many cases, we opened our markets to global competition when beyond extractive industries, we had nothing to compete with. So while the exports share of global direct investment projects has improved steadily over the past decade, much of the investment has reinforced the structural deficit of our economies," end quote. Honorable legislatures, it is impossible, almost impossible, to experience growth in an untransformed structure. And with all due respect, I would like to submit that Africa is where it is because African government have proceeded with the structural immaturity of adopting the capitalism of the West without industrialization. The truth that governments, and especially parliaments, need to face is this: that ever since the introduction by the multilateral financial institutions, IMF, World Bank, of structural adjustment programs in the late 1980s and 1990s, African countries have lived through the paradox of growth with little or no prosperity to show for. These institutions have not come to help Africa, they have rather come to impoverish Africa. We have combined to be deceived with financial numbers of measuring our economies, which don't really define development and prosperity. You know, we had the former speaker making reference to Greece and a country in Africa. The numbers don't make sense. But why are they like such? They are like such to continue deceiving the African governments and the African continent. For instance, I'll give you an example. In 2008, Equatorial Guinea was classified as a high-income country. The basis was on World Bank financial numbers. What were the numbers? Gross national income per capita at $13,150. What were the numbers? Gross domestic product per capita at $20,172. Far the highest in Africa, at par with developed countries. IMF records show that the country's GDP, that is Equatorial Guinea, increased by 40% between 1969 to 2006. Yet, World Bank has it that 75% of the population live below poverty line. What is that? A deception of financial numbers. The Washington consensus of focusing on growth through the lens of GDP or GNI numbers is only a fallacy on the numbers that are not duly analyzed and duly compared with the prosperity and the development of the peoples of Africa. Honorable members, it is a fallacy to compare GDP per capita of $20,000 with 75% of the population living below poverty line. There is hope, I believe, for Africa. Reading the draft African Charter of Family, Sovereignty and Values is a great inspiration. I have faith that the African Charter on Family Sovereignty and Values is being birthed by a breed of patriots, a generation of patriots that want to stop the scramble and exploitation of Africa. A generation of patriots, Honorable Chair, of those that want to see freedom for us in Africa. Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Merci, docteur, pour votre intervention qui nous rappelle tous nos déboires avec nos soi-disant partenaires occidentaux qui ont voulu nous garder dans la pauvreté. Alors, pour continuer à comprendre cette thématique importante, nous allons écouter successivement un certain nombre d'intervenants et après eux, si le temps nous le permet, nous allons pouvoir donc prendre d'autres intervenants venant de l'Assemblée. Alors je voudrais pour cela demander à chacun d'être précis et concis, juste pour